Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, Mom, I'm ready if you are.
Ready to go live. Hey, now it's not going live. Don't do it. It says ready. I don't know what's the matter here. Oh, there we go. We're live.
Bit of computer trouble this morning. So if we go off, just hang in there with us because it comes back on in about 10 seconds. But you're with Randal Wright this morning. And how could you be more privileged than that?
That's right.
We are so grateful to be with him.
Well, I'm not sure if anyone can hear me, but they're having some technical difficulties, obviously. So don't know if you can see me or hear me. I don't see the Andersons at all. So let's just wait for just a second and hopefully they'll come back in. There you are.
That's right. So if we go off, just hang tight. Okay. We are going to have a great discussion today, and we're so grateful for Randal being with us. You can read about his bio. He's been a teacher. He's retired. He's a PhD. He is a grandparent.
Yes.
That's what we're talking about today. We celebrate in the United States Grandparents' Day, September 10th. And we are delighted to have Randal talk to us about being a grandparent. You're a grandparent, Randal. Tell us what it's like for you.
I think the word grandparent is very significant. And I've read about how the word came to be, the next generation, those kinds of things. But I like to separate the two words. It's grandparent, and it's something that is magnificent, it's imposing, all of those kinds of things, the word grand. But if you apply it to that, I think it's our role to be something grand. It's not the disciplinarian, it's none of those kinds of things. It's something more than that. So I love being a grandparent, and I just love the whole thought of that. And that's what I'd like to do, is be a grandparent. So can't see you again. Don't know if you can see me. So we're going to wait for them to come back on, and hopefully it'll be shortly.
Okay, we're back for a minute. We are so sorry, everybody. Just keep with us, and we'll just try to figure this out. So Randal, talk to us.
Okay. I think one thing that helped me as I came into this role, several years ago now, but I took a class from Reed Bradford at BYU. He was voted one of the top 10 professors in the first 100 years of BYU. And if you go into the library there, you'll see his picture on the wall. But one of the assignments he gave us was, I want you to write your own obituary. And I thought, that's the weirdest assignment I've ever heard in my life. You know, here I am, basically a freshman at BYU, writing about being dead, for one thing, and my own obituary. And I just thought, what would I write? And so it was a very difficult assignment. And I just thought, what do you want him to say? Oh, he's the sorriest, laziest, no good. And I thought, I don't think that's what I want him to say. And so that had a dramatic effect on me, writing my obituary, what they would say about me, hopefully to the age of a grandfather. Now that I look back on that experience and thought, I'm so glad he had us do that, because it made me think, what do you want your grandkids to think about you? When I was at BYU as an undergraduate, thinking about those kinds of things. And I think that's one of the problems, is that too many of us haven't thought about it, have no plans, have no goals, have no now what. And so there's the initial, hey, here's your grandson or granddaughter, but we never kind of get into our role, so to speak. What's our role in all of this? And I think that's why I'm glad we're talking about it today, is what is our role? And Scott and I talked a little bit before we started here. Scott, why don't you tell them the thoughts you had about a grandparent?
So it's just interesting that we all came to fulfill different roles. We start being a child. We learn to be a husband and wife. Mom and dad go through that whole challenge, but someday we become grandparents, which is basically a patriarch and a matriarch, which is the role that's closest to Heavenly Father and Heavenly Mother. So it really is an opportunity for each of us to become more like him and to treat our children as he would, and our grandchildren. And his work and his glory is to bring to pass the immortality and eternal life of his children and grandchildren. So that idea that's a goal, a guideline for us. That's what we were kind of talking about.
Yeah, and I also mentioned that the brethren, the Quorum of the 12 in the First Presidency, basically got their call at about retirement age. At about the time when everybody shuts it down and sits in their easy chairs or go to the RV park to play checkers, here they get called to be apostles. And so, as I mentioned to Scott, right now in a couple of days, we're going to have a 99-year-old prophet. We have a 91-year-old first counselor, a 90-year-old second counselor, and a 94-year-old acting president of the 12. And that's our leadership. And you just go, and what's their role? Their role is to do just what Scott mentioned is to bring to pass the immortality and eternal life of men. And so I would think we've got the same role. And for our family, even more so, we are totally responsible. They're our flesh and bloods in most cases, or adopted. And you just go, we have this huge responsibility. And I just think, I just want to read something from Elder Rasband I was looking at just yesterday. It said, as members of the church, leaders of youth, anxious fathers, and concerned grandfathers all need to respond to the call for all hands on deck as it pertains to our youth and young single adults. So that Navy, when there's an emergency, it's all hands on deck. And so for us, I don't think it takes much research to see that we're losing our youth. And that's not something we want to dwell on here, but we're losing our youth and young single adults. We're losing our recently married, returned missionaries, temple marriage. And it's a frightening thing. And I just go, it's all hands on deck time. If there ever was a time in my lifetime that you can look out and say, hey, we need help here, it's right now. And so the prophets can do all they can to teach. They can't enter the homes in Utah and Texas or whatever to do our role. We have to be the ones that carry it out. And so if we can somehow realize that responsibility of being a grandparent, I think things would change, because I've been doing a little study on this subject lately. For whatever reason, I just kind of got bombarded with it. Why me? I don't even know the answer, but I've got letters in the mail. Can you do something on grandparenting? And I've done some writing in the past, and some of the Education Week students, participants, same thing, got asked about it multiple times. So I just started asking questions. Well, tell me about your experience as a granddaughter or a grandson. How was your grandparents? And I had heard some wonderful things, and I heard some things that would go, I'm not sure you would call that a grandparent. I'll just give you a couple here. One sister said that we've lived in the same area for 6.5 years, and my in-laws live almost the exact distance from, and we'll just use the example here of Spanish Fork to Salt Lake. So there's the difference of where they live. Not that big of a deal, about 50 some odd miles. And in 6.5 years, she said this is a temple married, active family, the parents. They've been to their house to visit 2 times in 6.5 years. And I'm going, do what? Are you kidding me, kind of thing? And another said, my granddaughter went to BYU, and when she got there, she called her grandparents in Alpine. So the distance there. I don't know. It's not very far. I know that much. And so she asked them to come down and eat lunch with her at BYU. She said, I don't have a car, but I'd love to see you, love to catch up. The response of the grandfather was, I don't like to eat out. We don't like to eat out. We like to eat at home. And in 4 years, they never came to visit her one time. And I just go, are you making this up? And the sister said, when we came into town, and they lived totally out of state, a long ways away, said if we came in, we would take her with us to visit my parents, but they never came to see her once in 4 years. And I just go, now you can say, well, that's the anomaly out there. That's the outlier. That's not most of it. But I do think all of us, regardless of our involvement with our grandkids, need to step it up a little bit and put them as a priority. And again, I talked to Scott and Angelle here about their experience with their grandkids. Maybe you can share with them the Colorado call you got.
Yeah, let's talk about that. Our cute granddaughter.
So it was a Wednesday when we got this phone call that said, my birthday's on Friday. We said, we know you're turning 12. We're so excited. This is before they changed the age for when you could go to the temple. So that was her first chance to be able to go to the temple that Friday. She said, yep, this Friday. And guess what? I've already visited with the bishop. He's holding my recommend until Friday morning so I can run by his house because I can't have it until I'm 12. But I'm going to temple that afternoon. We said, that is so wonderful. She paused and said, well, don't you think my grandparents ought to be here if we're going to the temple together? I said, of course they would. And we grabbed some flights and ended up there. And it was the most precious experience to have a chance to go to the temple together and build that beautiful memory. But it was just fun that she felt absolutely like she could just call and say, we've got 42 hours. Why don't you show up in Colorado? It was great.
So we got one example of Alpine, Utah down to Provo, Utah, that they don't like to eat out. So in 4 years, they never visit the girl who called them and wanted to get together. And I just go, same kind of situation, but just the attitude. And with the Anderson thinking about role of fathers and mothers and grandparents and the immortality and eternal life of man here, instead of, I don't like to eat out, for example, you just go, wow, what a contrast. And so I guess, how can we all develop that, and what is our role? And I just think, and you guys do a tremendous amount with family history, and I just think, okay, for grandparents, we shouldn't be the disciplinarians of our grandkids. That's not our role. We shouldn't be involved in those kinds of things. In fact, you want to turn the parents off, is try to get involved in some of the things that you shouldn't be involved in. You've got two different people coming together here. They've raised different, and everybody knows what your values are. You don't need to tell them what your values are, but what is our role in the whole thing? And I just think part of our role is that family history, for sure. The family stories, they're so incredibly important. Jerome Bruner, psychologist at Harvard University, and he had a tremendous impact on me with this. Not that I didn't already do it, but I use experiences, whether I'm at Education Week or writing or whatever. I use experiences a lot because he said that if someone tells an experience, a family story, for example, they're 22 times more likely to remember the principle you're trying to teach. And you look at the Book of Mormon and you go, okay, Nephi said the fullness of his intent was to persuade all men to come to Christ. And you go, well, how did he do it? He uses stories all over the place. He tells about his brothers doing this. And you go, wait, what is he trying to do? He's trying to get us to come to Christ. He'll use negative examples. He'll use positive examples, but he's telling stories. And if you look at the Book of Mormon, it's full of stories. Yes, we have the doctrinal sermons. And I could ask on General Conference, can you remember so-and-so's talk? And you go, I'm not sure I can remember that. Well, do you remember a talk about someone who had to give 3 talks in the leadership meeting, 3 talks in the Saturday night meeting, and 1 talk? And, oh, yeah, I remember that. And you go, exactly. And you probably remember that President Packer was trying to teach, which was to rely on the Spirit. You go, okay, I got it. Because of the story. What's that?
I said, I agree so much. And maybe I'll put a little plug in here for Scott and I created a video for Roots Tech, and you can just look that up. I
watched it, by the way. It was wonderful.
Oh, thank you. But the whole idea was that we need our family story now more than ever. And who better to carry on those stories from the past and to share what has been going on since they became grandparents and to unite families than to have grandparents do that. And that family narrative, there's so much research on how that is what can keep families close and unite them and help them be stronger, right? Like we've been talking about. And so anyway, you can look that video up. My mom interviewed her, well, actually our children, her grandchildren interviewed her and talked about the stories that she has shared over the years and the funny things that have happened and how close they are to her through these family stories.
Yeah, exactly.
So true. And there's so many ways we can do that. A lot of grandparents do not live in a close proximity. In fact, you want to talk about how that's changed over the years, and now it's not as easy if you don't.
Randall's an expert in this, but the idea was in the early 1950s and 60s, 70% of America lived in rural environments next to their grandparents.
Yes.
Within 14 years, 70% of America lived in urban situations away from their grandparents. And the stress level and problems increased dramatically because that family tie wasn't there. So sometimes, even if we don't live close, we need to be able to connect with them in lots of wonderful ways. We have lots of good resources these days.
We sure do. I mean, you can Zoom. I have one of our daughters-in-law, her parents are so good at this. They're serving a mission right now, and they still Zoom with their grandchildren. But over the years, they have read them stories. They have been consistent in connecting with those that don't live close to them. And it's such a good example of that. And we do have all these amazing resources to keep us close, right?
So I have, my mother died in February, and we had one of the 13-year-old great-granddaughters speak. And if you've got time, if I could just read a little bit.
Oh, please. I love this.
So she gave a talk at her great-grandmother's funeral. And so I just want to read something of it because it goes, what? She didn't live close to her. I mean, she didn't live a huge amount away, but she would see her maybe every year at most, maybe every other year in some cases. She lived 300 miles away approximately from where my daughter and her husband lived with this granddaughter. But sometimes they would go through there on their way to Florida or whatever and stop by her, see her. But she said this. Some people thought it was strange that me, a 13-year-old, got so close to my 98-year-old great-grandmother. I have to admit, I got some strange looks sometimes when I'd say, I'm coming over, but I have to call my nanny first. But if they could have only heard her stories and felt her love, I bet Nanny's phone would have never stopped ringing. I know all of her grandchildren felt like they were Nanny's favorite. She had a way of making me feel truly like I was her favorite. She made me feel so important. She read me stories out of her journals about her childhood. She told me about her missions. They were so detailed that sometimes I felt like I was there. When Nanny told me the story about her mom dying when she was 13 years old, the age of the granddaughter speaking, and having to drop out of school to help raise her two sisters and brother. And my mother lived in a rural part of Alabama when her mom passed away when she was 13. Turns out I couldn't even sort of imagine how scared she was, how alone she was, how hard that was. I bet if I could ask her dad or her brother and sisters, they'd say she never complained, but she did the best she could. I bet they'd thank her and give her a lot of credit. Well, she goes on at the end to say how much she thanked her. Again, she didn't live close to her. They talked every single night for the last 6 months of her life, every night. No matter
I love that.
put her friends on hold. But in the end, she said this. If I'd only known it would be the last time I got to talk to her. And my mom got sick about 2 weeks before she died. She lived on her own up until 98. She was at my brother and sister-in-law's house. And my mother said, I need to talk to Kennedy. And they said, for some reason, they finally hooked her up to FaceTime. It was the first time they'd ever done this. And then this is Kennedy at the end of her talk. If I'd only known it would be the last time I got to talk to her, and she talked to her on FaceTime, I would have told her, thank you. Thank you for teaching me about true friendship. Thank you for teaching me about Jesus Christ and his love for me. Thank you for helping me with my self-confidence and telling me how brilliant and smart I am. She's a twin, and she never felt quite as smart as her sister, but here's somebody telling her she's brilliant. Thank you for showing me true love. Thank you for sharing your life with me. Thank you for laughing with me. Thank you for needing me. Thank you for being one of my best friends. You changed my life for the better, and I'm so thankful for you. I love you, Nanny, forever. And
it's so beautiful. That's what we all want, right?
She doesn't live by her. She's not over at her house playing every day. She's not getting her fresh baked cookies and all those kinds of things, and yet talk to her every single day for the last 6 months of her life. That was the night before she died. She died that next morning when she talked to her on the FaceTime. And so I just thought, I want to be a grandfather like my mother was a great grandmother. She was amazing with all the kids, and just had this way of making them feel special. Regardless, the distance had nothing to do with it.
Exactly.
Right.
That is so beautiful. Our sweet little daughter took care of her great-grandmother during the time when she had Alzheimer's and had deteriorated quite a bit. After her passing, our daughter got married. She was having her first child, went into a time of crisis. She had been promised a blessing that those who loved her when she was young would be close to her and support her in this. And we were all whisked out of the room, and nobody was there, and she was all alone. And suddenly she smelled the smell of great-grandmother's house. And great-grandmother sang a song to her that only great-grandmother knew.
She could hear that.
And she could hear her singing to her, and it calmed her down, and everything went well with the birth. But it's not only, even now we have that role, we continue to have it. And what a precious thing it is when we can develop such a friendship that we can be there by their side when they need us. It's just critical.
It goes on and on.
And some people obviously don't know what to do. You know, they need help, they need input from other people. And I had an experience with a teacher at BYU that was life-changing for me. He said, you know, we talk about prayers and answering prayers to questions we don't know the answer to. And he said, you know, there's a lot of things you can't go to anybody to for answers. He says, but I want you to do something. I want you to write down a question. Just write down this: how can I be a better person? And we're going to go silent, and I want you to write out anything that comes to mind. And everybody, as I looked around, was writing away on how we could be a better person. And I just thought, isn't that interesting? We ask the question, we go about our life, and we listen for the answers, but then we write them down. And that's the difference sometimes between us and prophets. We ask those critical questions in our prayers in the morning. Maybe we stay after to wait a few minutes, see if there's an answer, but we get up, but then we forget what the question was by about noon. And then we don't get any answers. But what if we had the question and we wrote down the answers? What if we wrote down the question? Heavenly Father, how can I be a better grandparent? Question mark. And we just go about our day. But when something comes along that day, the next week, we write it down. And we act on those kinds of things. The teacher was Stephen R. Covey, and he had an amazing impact on me, I guess I'd say. And I just thought, why can't we do that? Just ask the Lord the question. We can call it a prayer, but it's in a little notebook or something. How can I be a better grandparent? Or for that matter, how can I be a better friend to my son or daughter? Or how can it be better at my calling? But we're talking about grandparents. And so I don't think we totally need books and whatever if we got straight from the Lord what we should be doing. But I do think it's nice to hear what other people do also, to hear that the Andersons threw down everything and flew to Colorado and go, you know what, I think I need to be a better grandparent. I don't have that situation, but I do have one where my grandson's got a baseball game and it's 50 miles away. And I know I'm busy, but I need to think about what's most important there. Is it I don't like to eat out, or should I go down to BYU and eat with my granddaughter who actually asked me to come? And so I'm seeing a lot of that. We're getting a lot of stuff in from asking the questions. So we're getting to see that. We see the negative, but we also see so much positive. My grandparents meant everything to me. When I was having a hard time, I would call my grandmother and she would talk to me. And, the family stories keep coming up again and again too, where they remember those family stories. And I've seen it in my own family, just little things and, not necessarily spiritual things, but you see those things go forward. I can't tell you how many times my dad, when he was kind of forgetful, he would say, I don't know whether I found a rope or lost a horse. Anyway, I feel
and there is that part about growing older.
I just thought, how cool is that they would pass those saying on, and I just love it when they say things that come from the past.
We actually have a little booklet of all my mother's sayings. Like
she grew up in Panguitch, and she's on right now listening. But
we love those. We love to hear those. And as grandchildren and great grandchildren, what can we do to nourish that relationship? I know our children are really good about posting and on social media. And my mother, she follows everything that they do on Instagram and Facebook and everything they share with her. And she just loves that. That helps keep her close. So keep posting and keep putting things on Family Search, things like pictures and stories. I wrote an entire essay about my grandmother. And now that's on there to influence and help our children and our grandchildren and our great-grandchildren as they can read that and feel her spirit and learn from her wonderful, dedicated life.
Yeah, and I just think that helps so much to know those stories. And they said my mother grew up in rural Alabama, and her dad, if you were to hear them talk, it was hilarious. Somebody have an accent. I don't even kind of have an accent. They had accents, but they had just one quick thing. My grandfather, we told him that they had built the Astrodome in Houston, Texas, and we lived about 80 miles from there. And they were coming to visit, so we were going to take him there. And I guess they had a similar kind of dome building in Mobile that would seat right at 10,000 people. So the Astrodome for a big event would seat 70,000. So it was almost exactly 7 times bigger. And so we took him over there. I'll never forget, I was right beside him. We got out and looked up at it, and you can't tell how big they are. It's deceiving how big it is. It's like the Marriott Center. You look outside, and then you walk in and you go, whoa. But I'll never forget this. He looked up and said, shoot, we got a dome this big in Mobile. Anyway, I laughed at myself. And so we got inside, and he looked around. I can still remember him looking inside and say, golly. As he looked around, and no big deal, but we tell it to our kids. Now, we got a couple of them that love to go to Florida, and so they'll go on I-10 and they go right through Mobile to get there. I can't even tell you how many pictures we've got of the Mobile Doom as they go by. And usually it's an in-law that's posting the picture. So just 2 weeks ago, I think, Christy, a daughter-in-law, said with the picture, shoot, we got a doom this big in Mobile. But it just brought a warm feeling to know of things being passed down to the next generation. And hear in-laws from Meridian, Idaho, quoting my grandfather when he saw the Astrodome
in Mobile,
Alabama. So
that is so
I
fun.
think it does something. And as you mentioned, the research shows that the kids are more confident, more self-esteem, higher achievers, all of those kinds of things because they know who they are. We need to know who we are, and family stories do it. And who knows those stories better than the grandparents? They've got
they lived them all.
Generation of experiences. They knew some of the people that have passed on before those kids are even born, and they can pass on to the next generation. And I think it's a huge part of our role to do that.
Amen.
Randall,
Yes.
you are such a treasure. Thank you
Thank
so
for
much
being with
today.
us.
And we're actually, I think it worked.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think
All the
it's paid
technical
off.
stuff.
If anybody has anything, so especially we're looking for specific experiences with a grandparent, we'd love to, we're going to publish some things, so we'd love to have it. But if you would just, can we give our email address here?
Sure, Randall, sure.
Yeah, it's Randall, Randal, 1L Wright, 48 at iCloud.com. So Randall Wright, 48 at iCloud. But if you have any stories about good things, because people are looking, I would like to, since people are asking, I'd like to just have a reservoir of helps for grandparents. And sometimes we just need ideas to spark us to even know what questions to ask. So
Yes.
if your listeners could help us out, we'd appreciate that a lot.
Yes.
Awesome.
Oh, we will.
We'll put that in
push
the
that.
notes too.
We will put that in the notes, and we'll put the link to our video about grandparenting and stories and their importance. And please share this wonderful interview with Randall. Thank you.
Thank you, Randall, so
for
much.
being with us.
You guys have a good day.
You
Okay, have a
too.
great day, everybody.
Bye-bye.